I'm Chris Motes, and welcome to The Good Life. Around our kitchen table, we talk about the stuff that matters. So pull up a chair as we visit with real people and talk about love and loss, sacrifice and salvation. At this kitchen table, we don't have all the answers, but we do believe that life is good. And we want you to hear the stories of everyday heroes living the good life. Well, welcome in for another episode, folks. As we are recording, it is All Hallows Eve, the vigil of the Solemnity of All Saints, or as your kids will know it, Candy Day. It's Halloween. Back for another episode, drawing nearer and nearer to November 5th, which I don't know what's happening on November 5th exactly. You probably haven't heard either. But we're gonna switch gears a little bit. We've been talking with guests over the last number of months about just a variety of issues, most often centered around kind of an ethic of life in the home, families, kids, and heard from lots of mothers on the show, which has just been wonderful. Today we're going to pivot just a little bit, and we're going to talk a little bit about a vision of good life in this state, just kind of related to some of the slavery of addiction and drug use, and what freedom looks like, and what like a healthy, flourishing society looks like. As concerns drug use, presence of drugs in our society, really excited to have Paul TenHaken on with us today. He is a husband, he's a dad, he's a believer, an Iron Man, also the mayor of Sioux Falls. Mayor TenHaken, welcome to the show.
Chris, great to be on, man. Yeah, anxious to dive into this topic.
Well, anybody who, I think so many of us here in the city of Sioux Falls, and if you love our listeners up in Gettysburg, but Sioux Falls, Mayor TenHaken, well known and loved by people in the city. Mayor Paul, as so many people know you. I think anybody who's been kind of listening to you knows that you've got views on just like addiction in this city and some of the problems that we face. And you've been no stranger to the conversation around marijuana. And I want to get into that, but I want to start, Mayor Paul, just by big picture. If you would kind of paint a picture for us, like what's a vision of a good life in this city look like? What's your dream for this city? Like what's a flourishing city of Sioux Falls look like?
Well, first off, thanks again for having me on. I mean, that's a really great question. What does a good life look like for a Sioux Falls resident? And a lot of times I am taking the angle of what's best for kids and families. And I use that lens because if kids and families are thriving in our community, the whole community is thriving. You show me a community where kids are not thriving, test scores are low, they're getting into trouble, there's no recreation activities for them, the daycares are in trouble, I'll show you a community that's struggling. So a lot of times a good life in this community, it looks like a life where kids have a good life, because if kids are doing good, that means seniors are doing good, that means families are doing good, that means our economy is doing well, that means our education system is thriving. So you will hear my administration talk a lot about kids and families and that lens that we use when we're making decisions.
Well, I love that too, because I think that obviously the office of mayor is a nonpartisan office. When you run, you're not on a partisan ticket. But I think even in this day and age that is marked by so much polarization, what you've just described is something that so many people can get on board with, regardless of where they might identify on that partisan spectrum.
There's nothing controversial about what I just said.
Right.
I mean, everybody should say,
yeah,
I love it. I want kids and families to thrive as well. Now, we may all disagree on what that looks like or how you get there, what thriving means. But to me, it means we're healthy. It means our economy is good. It means our kids are learning, they're growing. They're physically strong. They have access to good, fresh food.
Yes.
Those things. I don't think anybody can argue with the premise of a lot of those things.
No, that's beautiful. So I want to ask, kind of related to that, you've been very vocal on I Am 29, and I'm just going to, for our listeners, give the brief recap. 4 years ago, there were kind of a pair of measures on the ballot were both passed. It was a little confusing. Supreme Court kicked it out because it violated the single subject rule on the ballot 2 years ago, and South Dakota voters rejected recreational marijuana. Up on the ballot again, it's known as I Am 29. If you're opposed to recreational marijuana, you can vote no, is the vote that is opposed to recreational marijuana. Mayor Paul, why have you been So, I mean, you haven't been shy at all about where you stand on this issue. Why is that?
Well, I mean, I spend a lot of my job. I've been mayor for 6.5 years. Got another year and a half. It's an eight-year role, dealing with the impacts of addiction in our community.
Yeah.
Okay? If you show me crimes that have been committed, or violent assaults or homicides, chances are, Chris, at the nexus of that somewhere is there some sort of addiction, drug, alcohol challenge.
Yeah.
It's just the fact.
Yeah.
And so as we sit here today, and we deal with a lot of addiction-related issues in this community, it's my opinion that adding another addictive vice and legalizing another addictive vice in our community right now, I don't think that's a wise move.
Yeah.
And lots of reasons for that. I mean, at the spiritual, faith-based level, our bodies are temples. Okay, this is Christ's temple. The Holy Spirit lives in my body.
Yeah.
And we are called to take care of that.
Yeah.
And to me, putting addictive substances into our bodies is not biblically sound. Now, that aside, a lot of people won't buy that. They say, well, what about alcohol? What about other things? We'll talk about that, I'm sure. That's not on the ballot. All we're talking about is recreational marijuana.
Yeah.
And I've had a lot of experience talking with other mayors, other city leaders, other attorney generals about this. My best ally in this has been a guy named John Suthers, who was the AG in Colorado when they legalized. They're the first in the country to legalize marijuana.
Yeah.
Then he became the mayor of Colorado Springs, served 2 terms there. Was a great ally for me in this, and now he's since moved on. And he says, Paul, here's what's going to happen. You need to know, here's the playbook. The marijuana industry will put 2 things on the ballot. They will put recreational marijuana and medicinal marijuana. And they will market them together, advertise them together. So the voters will go to the polls. Yep. They'll be a little confused. They'll vote on both marijuana initiatives because they want the cancer patient who needs relief to have medicinal marijuana access.
Yeah.
That's exactly what happened in Sioux Falls.
That's
Voter
right.
confusion. They were both on there. They both passed. Well, the single subject rule was violated, so the voters then had a second bite at the apple the last election, and it failed. And it failed because people realized, okay, we already have medicinal. So what is this? Oh, this is just marijuana shops and vape shops and legalized recreational pot use, and we don't want that.
Yeah.
And so it failed by, I don't know, 6-8 points, something like that.
Yeah.
And so now this is the 3rd time this is going to be on our ballot. And I am confident in the voters of the state who are looking at this now and saying, hey, we have medicinal for people who need this for medicinal purposes. They have access to this. Introducing another vice at a time when we're dealing with the throes of addiction is not right for South Dakota.
Yeah. Well, thanks for kind of relaying, I guess, a bit of the experience of a mayor in Colorado who's kind of been through this. Mm-hmm. What are some of the other lessons learned from mayors, sheriffs, AGs, and other places?
Well, I'll tell you this. I am you said it's a nonpartisan office. It is. I am a Republican. Okay. I don't think anybody, it's not a huge secret.
Yeah.
But I was at a conference recently, and I was talking to a state senator from Maine.
Yeah.
And she's a very liberal lady.
Yeah.
Maine is a blue state.
Yeah.
And she asked me, where are you guys at with cannabis in South Dakota? I said, well, actually, it's on the ballot again for the 3rd time for rec. And I said, what's your thoughts on it? She's like, we have it here, and it's a train wreck.
Yeah.
And she's like, what you'll be told is you'll get all this revenue.
Yeah.
Okay, you're going to get all this tax revenue. That doesn't happen because you'll get the revenue, but the revenue is spent policing and enforcing, regulating the industry, dealing with the unintended consequences of, addiction challenges and other things that you have to then prop up and support. So for every, dollar you're going to make, you're going to spend 2, 3, 4 going out just dealing with the industry. The other thing that we are told is we need to stop criminalizing marijuana. We need to stop having people in jail that are in jail for petty marijuana charges. And I can tell you, Chris, that simply does not happen.
Yeah.
We can go down to the Minnehaha County Jail right now, and I can tell you there's no one in there for marijuana.
Yeah.
They may have had marijuana and also beat their wife.
Sure.
So they're in for assault, and that's on their charges too. So people see that, and they'll say, oh, see, we're putting people in jail for this. Like, no. It's one thing. But what happens, the biggest concern I have in this, amongst many, is the black market for this drug grows, and here's why. If you regulate it, what happens is you have a dispensary that sells recreational marijuana, and they have to pay taxes. They have to be subject to the Department of Health. They have to be subject to all the regulations that the state will put on this.
Yeah.
And that costs money.
Yeah.
So why would I open up a dispensary if I can sell it out of the back of my Honda Civic?
Right.
It's not regulated. It's nothing, and I don't have to deal with that. So the black market grows.
Yeah.
And then you have all the legal people that are saying, hey, we're trying to follow the laws here.
Yeah.
And you got these guys in the back alley that are selling it. It's laced with whatever because it's not tested. It's not regulated.
Yeah.
So that's another fallacy that the industry is trying to sell us, to say, hey, this will allow our cops to focus on bigger issues. This will decriminalize just a petty, non-addictive drug, and that's all fallacy.
Can you say, I've heard the word a couple of times, industry. Can you say a little more just about what are the industrial commercial interests that are in play here? Because obviously, anytime something like this is on the ballot, there's a lot of money kind of going into a campaign. There's money to be made, presumably. What do we know about those who are really advancing IM29 and the business interests in play?
I mean, with any campaign, anytime you see things on the ballot, and I know it sounds so cliche when people say follow the money, but you look at who is supporting different ballot initiatives, okay, different campaigns. And in the case of IM29, it's people who are in the industry. They maybe have medicinal dispensaries already, and they're banking on. There's not a lot of money in medicinal. I'll just lay on the table. Medicinal is not where the revenue is at. They're banking on rec marijuana.
Okay.
And so you aren't going to see Premier Bank Card, Mid-County Communications, individual donors giving to IM29.
Sure.
You're going to see people who have a vested financial interest in, quite honestly, taking advantage of an addictive substance. And so that is when I say the industry, that is the industry. And for the third time now, we've had a gentleman leading this, not from South Dakota, no South Dakota ties, comes in, runs a campaign, has lost twice in a row, leaves, comes back, tries it again.
Yeah.
And so there's not even really any local leadership around this issue. So for those reasons and others, I think voters should just really, really dive into who's behind this, what's the end game for it, and what will it mean for our state, not today, but 2, 3, 5 years down the road.
Something you touched on earlier, just as we talk about vices, maybe this question is a little philosophical, but there are a lot of vices that are legal. Mm-hmm. We mentioned alcohol earlier. What's the counter argument? Why should actually this vice be kept illegal when other vices are permissible?
Well, I talked to a guy the other day. He came into town and he had never been to South Dakota before. His first thing he asked me, he said, I love your city. What's with all the casinos, man?
Yeah.
He's like, there's casinos everywhere.
Yeah.
He's like, you got more casinos in Vegas. I'm like, well, they're kind of casinos. They're radio lottery and they're everywhere and this and that. And that, I would say, gambling is a vice. I don't think anybody could argue with that.
Yeah.
In fact, you can't turn on the TV now without them encouraging you got to bet on this game. You got to do a prop bet. You can bet on the election now and who's going to win. And gambling has become another vice that we've introduced in our community.
Yeah.
So there are certain vices that, quite honestly, you don't want to take away people's freedoms, right? So if people want to say, hey, I want to gamble and I want to spend money in casinos and the government shouldn't tell me what I can and can't do.
Yeah.
I want to drink alcohol and the government shouldn't tell me how much I can or can't consume. I want to smoke marijuana. Government shouldn't tell me what I can do with my body. Well, we live in a society of laws, right? Yeah. And your freedom stops, when it starts to impact others around you. So, for instance, I'll pick on traffic laws, speeding.
Yeah.
I want to drive my car how I want to drive my car.
Yeah.
Government shouldn't tell me how to do that. Well, it's true. But your driving can impact other people, and you're putting other people's lives in danger, and you're putting our law enforcement lives in danger, and you're creating expenses to our society with the enforcement of that. And so it's the same with marijuana. It'd be fine if it was just you in your basement wanting to do this. That's not what's going to happen. Yeah. It's going to affect other people outside of the immediate consumer, and there's societal costs then that me as a mayor, I have to look out for and say, okay, what's going to be the societal cost of this? And alcohol is not on the ballot. If it was, I'd have some opinions on that too,
Sure.
because alcohol in a lot of ways is probably the most abused drug in our entire society.
Sure.
Right? And I think we deal with that. We struggle with that. And this is from a guy who
Yeah.
drinks a beer once or twice a week. So
Yeah.
I'm not saying alcohol's bad. If
Yeah.
I am 29 and rec marijuana was for all responsible adults who could just say, hey, I want to have a puff every once in a while and I want to, smoke some weed once or twice a week, that would be fine. But that's not what will happen.
Yeah.
And we will have to deal with the societal impacts of people who can't control that, who can't, limit their intake, and honestly, who will use that as potentially a gateway drug to other things that could
Yeah.
lead to worse ramifications.
Well, this vision of freedom is really, I mean, it's almost like we're limiting ourselves and our human potential. We're like freedom is for excellence, and as like a Ironman triathlete, you would like, I mean, you're just an excellent person, but I kind of harken back to, you remember DARE, the program for kids?
Of course.
I don't know if they still do that or not, but it was like they just, in telling us the drugs were bad, implicit within that was like, kids, you're made for great things, and this will hold you back.
Yeah.
This will be an obstacle. And I have the sense that we're like losing that in this debate of like, even socially, not just individually, telling individual kids you're made for greatness, but even socially, like, we can be a great city. Like, we're free to be great, and this will hold us back.
Bingo. I think it's a great point. And I have yet to have a state or a mayor in a city where marijuana has been legalized say, hey, when we did this has been really good for our community. This has really benefited our community in a lot of ways. I mean, if someone can show me that person or show me that community that's just singing the praises of marijuana, I'll listen, but I have yet to find it. And I'm asking, and believe me, and I'm poking around and I'm talking to colleagues. So the good thing about the position we're in South Dakota is we're behind the game in this, if you will, and that other states have done this. Other cities have done this.
Sure.
And we have the benefit of saying, how is this going in Oregon? How is this going in Colorado? Oregon, they went so far as they started with marijuana, and then they decriminalized small traces of, harder drugs, and it's been a train wreck, and they're reversing their legislation because they realize, like, maybe this isn't such a good thing to say, hey, freedom, put what you want in your body, and the unintended consequences to the community have been really, really great.
Yeah. So I was at a press conference a couple weeks ago that it's an organization called Protecting South Dakota Kids. They're opposing IM-29. Kind of in the back of the room, I noticed one of our local police leaders. What are you hearing from law enforcement? And I just want to be careful because I don't, I guess, know if they have guardrails about engaging on this kind of stuff. But, what are some of the concerns that you're maybe hearing from that community?
Well, what I hear from is this. The one is the point I mentioned about the black market, right, and what that will do. So to say, hey, this is going to allow our cops to focus on other things, it's going to be the opposite. They're going to have to spend more time policing the black market, busting black market sales, and so that's a resource we simply don't have. The other thing is, I helped open up a place called The Link about 3 years ago.
Yeah.
In downtown Sioux Falls. The Link is a place that serves people dealing with chronic addiction. And I have a chance to talk to people there a lot. I have a chance to talk to our staff there a lot. And Chris, you're going to be very hard pressed to find someone who is addicted to meth or opiates or whatever, who in their early innings were not marijuana users.
Yeah.
And people say, oh, it's just Paul, it's fear tactic, reefer madness. It's not addictive. It is.
Yeah.
It is. And it leads to other things. That high only gets you so far, and when people want something else, it goes further. And so the downstream, impacts of that, and this is what obviously our cops are concerned about, is that it becomes a gateway drug to other things in our community, which leads to other challenges that we have to deal with.
Sure. I think there's also a connection to a medical component. At least in past years, there was a big coalition of groups, including big healthcare systems that were opposing this. What can you tell us about marijuana, its effects on the brain? We were experiencing kind of a youth mental health crisis in America right now. What are some of the kind of healthcare angles of this?
Well, I'm not a healthcare expert. I'm not going to pretend to be one, but I do know that there are direct ties between kids' depression and marijuana use. And I've read studies on this and seen studies on this, that they work in tandem. And so I don't think for a developing brain, even though the industry will say, well, this isn't for kids. This is for people, 18 and over. It will get to kids. It just, it will happen. And so I think the organization, when you say protecting South Dakota kids, I think that's a good angle to say, hey, I'm not worried about the responsible 45-year-old in this. I am worried about what this does to school systems and what this does to the mental health of our youth. So I think that's a very real concern. I will sometimes hear the argument that people don't overdose and die from marijuana, and it is extremely rare for that to happen. Just like it's very, very rare for someone just to drink and drink and drink and drink and then die that night. But they do drink, and then there's unintended consequences of that drinking, whether that be impaired driving, whether that be broken marriages, whether that be broken relationships, whether that be other drugs that spin out of that. So those are the things I think about and worry about with IM29.
No, and it's certainly, I'm not an expert either, but if for listeners that want to kind of learn more about what some of these risks are medically, the South Dakota Catholic Conference has a number of resources. You can go to sdcatholicconference.org and kind of explore some of the links that exist between addiction to marijuana and increased rise in schizophrenia, for example. And I guess one of the points that I've heard come up that really struck me is that this is not sort of your 1960s hippies sort of grew this in the garden kind of pharmaceutical. There's a real potency to this stuff. It's very, very serious.
And the stuff that we are testing is tenfold of what it should be in terms of its THC levels and so forth. And the industry is very unregulated. It's very Wild West, and that's why a proponent will say, well, then we got to legalize this so we can regulate it. And it's like that will only exacerbate the unregulated industry. And so we are never going to do away with the unregulated industry. The thing that I think is important in this discussion, not even a state or a city level, is that marijuana is still classified as a Schedule I narcotic at the federal level, right? So for whatever reason, that has never changed. Now, if that would change, that changes the discussion. But at a federal level, they're still saying this is a Schedule I narcotic for these reasons. And so it's illegal. I don't know how else, until the feds declassify this or reclassify it, we have to treat it as such, and we'll continue to treat it as such, as a Schedule I, narcotic.
Kind of just circling back to where we started, which is a vision of flourishing the city that is really actually centered around healthy families, healthy kids, like actually just having an environment for kids in which they can just like grow up and be free and innocent and healthy. I know you're a dad. Any advice for parents about how do you talk to your kids about making healthy choices and drug use? Kids may encounter this stuff out there, even outside of the home. Any counsel for parents out there?
My counsel to parents is you have to have really open and transparent discussions with your kids about this. And if you don't feel like you have that relationship with your kid, you need to find someone who can pour into their life, a mentor, a sports coach, something who can have the discussion. I had 40 kids from one of our title schools in the city hall last week. It's 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And they asked me questions, and one of them said, if there's one thing you could change in our city, what would it be? And I'm like, man, that's a great question. I said, you know what? The one thing I would change, kids, is I would wave a wand and make all drugs disappear. And I said, because at the root of almost every problem we're facing in a community, big problem, is drugs. And so I spent the next couple minutes talking with them about drugs. And I talk with them about marijuana, and I talk with them about, even alcohol. And our police chief was there, and he chimed in. So my message, my concern, like I said, it's not for the 40, 50-year-old adult who wants to smoke some pot on the weekend. Okay, if we could wave a magic wand and never get it in the hands of anyone 30 and under, this is a different discussion. But that will not happen. So that's my concern with I'm 29 is just protecting kids. So if I could wave that magic wand, say drugs, you're gone, and that's the one thing in our community would be a different place. I can tell you that.
What was the kid's reaction? I mean, it is a really good question for a child to ask.
You could hear a pin drop in the room.
Really?
Yeah, because we were having the discussion, and the police chief and I were talking about, some of the things we see with drugs, and some of the conversations we have to have with parents, and times when the chief has to go to someone's house and tell the parent, "Hey, we had to arrest your child tonight because of this," or worse yet, we found your child OD'd on a drug because it was laced with 1 gram of fentanyl that they didn't know about. Now that child did not start with that; they started with marijuana. Ended up in that situation, and so they were locked in, and our police chief does a great job talking about this topic.
Okay, so our election day is just a couple of days away, and I'm not going to ask you to go on the record with your handicap of what the vote's going to turn out, but I guess early voting's been underway for quite some time. If you haven't voted yet, you can get out there and do it. If you live in Minnehaha County, you can go down to the courthouse or show up to your local polling place on election day. Just lots of leaders in our community, civic and spiritual, encouraging a no vote on I am 29. Certainly don't want to cut that conversation short, but we've got a couple of other things on the ballot too. Mm-hmm. A number of things you're interested in. One of the things that the many Catholics and plenty of other people across the state are interested in is Amendment G. Yeah. Any particular thoughts there?
Yeah, following that one closely as well. And Chris, I do believe that we have to continue to look at the topic of abortion and say, okay, is there some pragmatic, realistic protections we need to put in place for those very rare cases? But Amendment G is not it. Yeah, it's not it at all, and it's very extreme, and it doesn't just return us to a Roe versus Wade landscape. It takes it to a whole different level in terms of some of the protections it removes and parental consent and some things that I'm kind of concerned about. So our family, we've already voted. We're certainly a no on G in our house, and I think it doesn't mean the conversation can't continue, but this one is, as the tagline is for the campaign, it is too extreme for the state, I believe, and I think we can do better.
Yeah, no, beautifully put. And obviously people know where the Catholics are, is that life is just so eminently valuable, regardless of how it's conceived. But even if you don't agree with us on that, there are just many, many people out there that all agree that G is just too extreme. Mayor Paul, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Chris.
And to all of our listeners who want to kind of tune in to where the Catholic bishops are weighing in, go to sdcatholicconference.org and look at the bishops' positions there. To all of our friends and neighbors out there, I'm Chris Motes. Thanks for joining us on this episode of The Good Life. Until next time, be good.